Good afternoon. Welcome to the Spring 2025 Dr. Thomas and Albert J. Shipka Speakers Series. We're happy to have you all join us today. And before introducing our speaker for today, let me first say something about the people that this series honors. The Shipka Speakers Series honors a father and son, Al Shipka and Dr. Tom Shipka. After graduating from Cowen Memorial High School in 1932, Al Shipka was a steel worker in the Camel Works of the Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company. As the years passed, he became the president of his local union, a member of the staff and assistant director of the United Steelworkers of America, District 26, president of the Greater Youngstown AFL-CIO Council, and the first representative of organized labor to be appointed to the YSU Board of Trustees. Al died in 1975. Tom Shipka earned a PhD in philosophy from Boston College and served on the YSU full-time faculty from 1969 to 2006. He helped organize and lead the faculty union from 1971 to 1986, chaired the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies from 1986 to 2006, and served as a fundraiser for both academics and athletics throughout his YSU career. He received the Distinguished Professor Award 3 times for his teaching and scholarship, including a widely used text for introductory philosophy. His gifts to YSU include an endowed scholarship for a student athlete. Dr. Shipka was inducted to the YSU Athletics Hall of Fame as a contributor in 2004 and the YSU Heritage Society in 2009. One of Dr. Shipka's fundraising activities was a group we call the Philosophy Circle. The Philosophy Circle is a generous group of donors who have made it possible for the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences to bring world-class speakers like Dr. Cowen to YSU. Tom, would you please stand for a moment? And please join me in thanking Tom for all of his work that he's done for students and faculty and community. Thank you. We invite you all to join us for refreshments after the talk, which was supposed to be set up behind the Chestnut Room. So now, since they weren't set up there, they're very difficult to find. That was supposed to be funny. I understand why it wasn't, but they're right over there and right over there. So please don't take off right away. There's always way too much food, so please stay and enjoy it. Okay. Our speaker for today is Dr. Joshua Cowen. Dr. Cowen is a professor of educational policy at Michigan State University. He was the founding director and co-director of the Education Policy Innovation Collaborative from 2016 to 2020. His current research focuses on teacher quality, student and teacher mobility, and evaluations of state and local education programs. His work's been published in multiple scholarly journals and policy briefs. He has appeared in numerous national media outlets and has been funded by a diverse array of philanthropies as well as state and federal grants. From 2015 to 2018, he served as co-editor of Educational Evaluation and Policy Analysis, the flagship peer-reviewed education policy journal in the United States. He was also previously associate editor of Education, Finance, and Policy and remains on the editorial boards of both journals. He also served as an expert witness for an Ohio voucher challenge. Dr. Cowen has been studying school vouchers for a couple of decades at this point. In his talk today, School Vouchers, Culture Wars, and Defending the Public Good, he will cover a brief history of school vouchers, discuss what the current research says about their effects on kids and families, and offer an explanation of how vouchers are part of the current historical and political moment. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Joshua Cowen.
Well, I appreciate that. Very kind introduction. It reminds me I probably need to say a little bit about how I came to be giving talks like this, but I'll try to get through that a little bit in the text of what I have to say, and then also in maybe the Q&A, which I want to leave some real time for here. First, just thanks, Alan, thanks, Dr. Shipka, thanks to Dr. Bopat over there for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I drove down last night from East Lansing, Michigan. I have always sort of admired the work that you guys do here on this campus, and I have a lot, my dad's entire family is from this part of the state here, so I feel sort of a deep historical connection to this part of the state. And I have a daughter who's not too far away down at Kenyon College, so even though I will not get to see her on this trip, you parents out there, just even being in the same geographic region as one of your kids feels a little bit good today. So that's all of which is a long-winded way of saying I really do appreciate you having me. So what a time it is to be speaking about public education, about threats to public education, threats to public funding for crucial resources, supports, and services all over the country. A few months ago, when this academic year began, when this very school year began, and when I started traveling, which I'm doing almost every week talking about these issues, just a few months ago, things were very different, weren't they? President Trump was still a former president. No one had ever heard of Doge. Elon Musk was still sort of just a goofy billionaire who happened to own Twitter, or X. The people of Canada and Mexico still looked at us as trading partners, and the people of Ukraine still looked at us as allies. The story I was going to tell you today, it takes a while to plan these types of events. The story I was going to tell you had mostly been a history lesson. Instead, it's almost breaking news. And I mean that in both senses of the word. Breaking in the sense of urgency, and also breaking as in a sudden, forceful, and threatening undoing. And it's one, as I mentioned, that I have been speaking about all over the country the last few months. Arizona, here in Ohio a couple times, Florida, Idaho, Kentucky, Louisiana, New Hampshire, Wisconsin, Texas, Tennessee, and more. It's a story, by the way, that a lot of people don't want you to hear. There are groups like the Heritage Foundation and other, frankly, right-wing think tanks have spent a lot of the last couple of years trolling me, combing through my public records, weaponizing open records processes to read thousands of my Michigan State emails, and more. And at first, that was a little intimidating. But now I'm sort of honored. Because if what I had to say to folks like you all was wrong, they would just ignore me. But that story is right, it's real, and unfortunately it's terrible for kids and families. So I want to break it down. So first, a little level setting. Let me just sort of, for folks who I think, if you're from Ohio, if you live here, you grew up here, you probably know what a voucher is. But I just want to kind of level set that for a second. What I mean by voucher is any public taxpayer-funded contribution to private K-12 tuition. That could come through direct appropriation, the state budget making process, like it does here in this state. It could come through a tax expenditure, which is basically states set these things up where wealthy donors or corporations can divert what they owe in a state, or potentially, I'll talk about this in a minute, federal taxes into something of a third-party vendor that then pays out vouchers. There are these newfangled things called education savings accounts, which basically are vouchers plus additional expenses that you can add to them. But however you market it, however you name it, a voucher, for the purposes of today's conversation and for the purposes of public policy, are taxpayer-funded private school tuition plans. All right. So from the level setting standpoint, I've taken the liberty of posting some of the victory lap slides from an organization called EdChoice, not your EdChoice voucher system, but a think tank founded by Milton Friedman that runs some of the research purported to show things about vouchers. But their slides are accurate, here in this case at least. This is a national political push, and policy push that has some roots here in Ohio. I put two different versions of this. One is a map that simply tells you how prevalent these different types of voucher systems are. For those of you in the back, the black states show where a voucher type system is, and the little dots within states show different versions of these. So you've got really by their count, 8 different programs here resembling a voucher system. But what I'm really trying to focus us on today is not just the geographic spread, but the shape of this graph here on the side, which is telling you that these things have grown over time, and especially over the last couple of years, or 3-4 years. So even if you can't see the text, you can see the shape of the picture, right? So the states in black show what's going on across the country and why I've been on the road talking about this stuff. And then the graph on the right shows what's happened over time. As an aside, and as we'll see, vouchers have devastated student learning in the United States for kids who transfer from public to private schools using them. And it's partly why organizations like EdChoice have turned to international voucher systems, which tend to show slightly better things. Their favorite model is the voucher system set up by the Pinochet regime in Chile. Now, I don't know about any of you, won't make any guesses, but I decline from the outset the idea that right-wing dictatorship should give us a model for anything, much less investments in public policy. But Milton Friedman, the economist who created the idea for vouchers, saw fit to help this guy out, so here we are. Before we get into those results, though, I want to talk about who does and who doesn't use vouchers and where all this is coming from. I apologize for continuing to look back this way. I just want to make sure that I'm paying a bit of attention to what I'm showing you on screen. So I showed you that map a second ago. That's not the same thing as saying who wants vouchers or who uses vouchers. These are recent headlines. Voters don't want vouchers. Vouchers have never actually survived a statewide ballot initiative. When you actually put these things to voters, they reject them and always have. It's the state legislatures that have been pushing these things through. That's true even in 2024, when President Trump won 2 of the 3 states that otherwise rejected vouchers by wide margins. So folks who voted for President Trump don't want vouchers either. So I am taking a very firm position against these things from a policy standpoint today, but I emphatically insist that it's not a partisan stance. There is bipartisan opposition to these things, at least when you talk about what the electorate is saying. So who does want these things? Well, I mentioned the Heritage Foundation a second ago. Vouchers were 2 of the first 3 paragraphs in Project 2025, Heritage's Project 2025 chapter on education. Remember that thing? It's kind of news again, right? Number 1 on that list was dismantling the U.S. Department of Education. That first paragraph there, you can't see the text. Number 1 is dismantle the U.S. Department of Education. Paragraphs 2 and 3 are vouchers. These things literally go together. So what else is this about? Well, it's about billionaires. I just got back from Texas a couple weeks ago where I was speaking and testifying to bipartisan groups of legislators and community leaders who had in common strong support for their public schools and strong aversion to being told what to do by a billionaire heiress from West Michigan, from my state. Because when we're talking about vouchers, we have to talk about someone named Betsy DeVos, who has said she wants vouchers to help displace public schools as centers of community. Her words, not mine. We also have to talk about billionaires like Charles Koch, TikTok's Jeff Yass, and Elon Musk himself, who is actually creating private schools now ahead of what it appears to be a successful push for vouchers in that state. What do all these folks have in common? Well, they're filthy rich, and that's, I don't have any issue with that. Wealth creation's great. But the most important thing you need to know is these are a handful of some of the wealthiest people on the planet pushing that money into public policy to try to make it look like the world they think should exist. And that's actually something that you really should know at the ground level when we're talking about the policy impacts of vouchers. Really, these are, at the end of the day, just garden variety subsidies for special interests, industries that folks compete with on a daily basis in state capitals all over the country for taxpayer dollars. What's that mean in practice? What it means in practice is that, for one thing, most voucher users were already in private school to begin with. About 3/4 of all voucher users were already in private school to begin with. So these things get marketed as new opportunities, hope, opportunity scholarships, hope scholarships, freedom scholarships is what they're called, how they're marketed and packaged. But at the end of the day, the vast majority of the users of these things were already in private school to begin with. This is just a subsidy for existing behavior. And increasingly, including in your state, so this was true way back even in the Cleveland voucher system, which is one of the first 2 voucher programs to exist in this country in the 1990s. But it was a low-income, means-tested, targeted program, as it was in Milwaukee, where I got my start on these issues. But even in Cleveland, Milwaukee, the vast majority of the users of these programs, even in the low-income tested programs, were coming from private school already. These were just subsidies taking the place of scholarships and things like that. But now that the cap has been blown off these voucher systems and become all but universal, or universal in practice, meaning anyone with any income level can get them, the vast majority of the users of these things are wealthier. They're not just in private school, but they're wealthy families. And that's true here in Ohio as well in every other state that's done this. And these folks are saying the proverbial quiet part out loud. In your state, for example, oh, that's the last slide. See, I didn't look. That was my last comment. So in Ohio, just last budget cycle, legislators are going right ahead and diverting even state grant funding to private school construction. That's new. That is, almost everything that I have to say here is true across the country. This is an Ohio-specific phenomenon, actually starting to fund private school construction. The idea literally is to make room in these small, usually religious schools to preach and often proselytize, which the US Supreme Court has said they can do. So what happens here is you've got this alternative effort to set up an entirely separate sector or system of education, with the state increasingly picking up the tab for these private school constructions, making space to take more users. So what does happen to I mentioned that the vast majority of users of these programs are already in private schools, so what happens to the kids who transfer? Again, that's only about 25% of users of these programs, but for these kiddos, they suffer some of the worst academic declines in the history of education research. How bad? Well, we're talking about like natural disaster bad. On par with what COVID-19 did to academic outcomes, or what Hurricane Katrina did to test scores for the kids who survived that natural disaster. Why is that? Aren't vouchers just a lifeline from so-called woke or failing public schools, as the heritage guys claim? No, not on average. For at-risk kids in particular, now this is changing because these programs are becoming more increasingly available to wealthy families, but for the at-risk kids in particular who transfer from public to private schools, maybe because some of those public schools haven't always lived up to the bargain, but they're not able to get into these elite academies that you see in the movies, that maybe even some of you came from. They're not adding hope and opportunity to get into those places. They're more of an anchor into what I call subprime or financially distressed providers. Schools that maybe aren't interested in a back to the basics academic approach, and it's why you see the voucher scores I mentioned a second ago here are particularly bad in the STEM subjects, math and science. It's tough to teach calculus when you're teaching creationism too. So again, what is this all really about? I think it's important to talk about what else is happening in this country. So one other piece of this here to understand is that these voucher schools do the choosing. These aren't school choice programs for parents, these are schools' choice programs. There's nothing in the recent legislation, either here or elsewhere in this country, that prohibits the schools from doing the picking, and usually these bills that pass actually affirmatively protect the right for schools, these private schools, to do the choosing. So students with disabilities often get turned away at the door. Students potentially from LGBTQ plus families. We've heard reports about students from divorced families, of which my own is one. Single moms. Maybe a teenager who might get pregnant and gets asked to leave because her actions were contrary to the school's value system. All those kiddos could be no room for them at the inn. Vouchers are about the school's choice, not school choice for kids and families. So again, what is this really about? Now, if you've read this book that I've written talking about all this stuff, and I don't blame you if you haven't, you'll know that one of the biggest backers of pro-voucher research in this country, and think tanks across the country, like the ones peering into my MSU emails, is a group called the Bradley Foundation. Every single study purporting to show that voucher schemes help kids was funded by Bradley, among others. Bradley was actually, Bradley Foundation, this is a Milwaukee-based right-wing think tank, foundation, was actually very active in the earliest days of the Cleveland voucher program that seeded your statewide program here today. The Bradley Foundation helped solicit political support and underwrote almost all of the legal defense for the case that became Zellman versus Simmons-Harris in 2002 at the Supreme Court, based in Cleveland. That included putting a lawyer on retainer who had just achieved some notoriety on another right-wing political priority at that time. And that was impeaching Bill Clinton. That's right. For those of you who, and I'm not sure how many of you are, but for those of you who remember Ken Starr, he was the original legal point man defending vouchers in both Wisconsin and here in Ohio, and then at the Supreme Court, and the Bradley Foundation paid his fees. More recently, Bradley was also driving the election 2020 election denial activity. Most of the groups with the name America First in the title, funded and seeded by the Bradley Foundation, and even attacks on public school decision-making during the COVID-19 pandemic. These folks are going after many districts, and still are, for their pandemic era decision-making, some of which does need to be revisited. Not defending every one of those decisions. My point, though, is that the organizing and the funding behind the political attacks on districts came from some of the same sources pushing vouchers. It's not a shock, really. Almost as if the pandemic era attacks on school decision-making wasn't really about school closures or kids at all, but was really just an excuse to push a long-term political priority that dates back to at least 1990. Almost as if what's happening now with job losses, cuts to Social Security, cuts to Medicaid, cuts to Head Start, and cuts to education research showing what actually helps kids, and cuts to the entire Department of Education aren't actually about efficiency or kids at all. And I apologize for continuing to keep flipping back and forth, just trying to keep y'all on the same page as I am. So, let's circle back to the very beginning of all this. So all this is happening, these cuts to Medicaid, these cuts to Head Start, just yesterday, I suppose, but really the morning is where this news is coming out that the Trump administration, while all this is being pushed, has reactivated its debt collection programs for student loans. Now, I think of this as related to the voucher scheme stuff because if you think about this, remember the data are very clear across the country. 3/4 of voucher users are already in private school to begin with. Those tuition subsidies, particularly for wealthy families, are being forgiven by the states that have passed voucher systems. One way to think about your voucher system in the state is as a tuition forgiveness program for wealthy families who want to put their kids in private K-12 schools. But now they're activating and canceling really the student loan forgiveness program for higher education. And at the same time, states like yours are having a difficult time paying their bills for typical public education services. And you don't have to take my word for it. Like, this is what these guys are saying. I'm just showing you the headlines. They're saying they don't even have money to pay for the schools under the fair school funding formula in your state. But of course, they've found the cash to keep turning on the dollars for vouchers. And by the way, they're doing this even with Washington promising to send more voucher money too. Under the current Congress, the feds are getting into voucher funding. There's something in it for billionaires too. In this case, it's called the Educational Choice for Children Act. This is going to be part of the federal reconciliation process in the budget right now. It's basically a new federal voucher bill, and I can talk in the Q&A about why that's allowed constitutionally if folks are interested in that question, but for the moment, let's just stipulate that it is. It's a new federal voucher bill, but it's also a scheme for wealthy families to have a tax shelter. It would cost $10 billion in diverted revenue in year one. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, what these things do is they put some of what they owe in federal taxes into middleman groups that then pay out vouchers. So in your state, the way this would work, because the state is already paying for its own voucher system here, the federal dollars would act as a top-off. So say you get, I don't know what the exact dollar figure is today, let's just say it's $10,000 from the state for existing private school kids to pay their tuition. And then the feds come in and pay another $10,000 on top of that. It's a pretty good deal if you can get it. But you got to get into the school to use it. Now, the way this bill's written is it would go, it's being marketed as an anti-poverty device, but it would go toward 300% of local median income. Again, I'm not here to beat up on wealthy families. I am here to say that these programs don't work for lower income and working families. And it's just, that difference makes all the difference when you're talking about allocating scarce resources. 300% of local area income in my county, in my region, is about $300,000 a year that you'd be eligible for these funds. That's not necessarily vast wealth, but neither is it an anti-poverty program. And states like yours in Arizona and Florida, the three biggest voucher systems, show that the average voucher user not only was already in private school, but they make substantially more money in terms of household income than the average public school student. So the point here is that these are subsidies for wealthier families. It's just how the data come out. And it's by program design. That's what happens when you lift an income cap for participating in anything. But the point here is not so much to add to what Ohio is spending, it's actually to force vouchers into states like mine that don't have them at all. So much for sending education back to the states. So, okay, so I want to leave some time for questions. I hope we have those, but I do want to, We are in a difficult moment. Whichever side of the political divide you're on, we got really, really hard choices. And when I first started talking about this stuff, everything I just said to you, I mean, I showed you headlines, but I could have showed you study after study after study after study that showed the same stuff. But I have been all over the country at this point, and I wrote a book about this, and when you write a book, you have an editor, and my editor was fantastic. One thing she pressed me on happened to be one of the things, probably the most common question that I get in groups like this, or when I testify in legislators or speak to members of Congress or whoever, they'll be like, okay, Cowen, we know you hate these things, but what are you for? And I feel like I have to answer that because I think you all have given me a little time to talk about what's not working. But I also think it reflects the economic reality of the time we're in too. We have to keep moving forward and thinking of policy solutions that do work for kids and families, right? In my editor's case, she was just trying to get me to end the book on a more uplifting note than just gloom and doom. But there's a serious part to that beyond marketing too. So, I think it's important to explain where we can rebuild, where we should be renewing, and where we should be reinvesting in public models of education for kids and families. And I think part of the first step there is to just explain what this is, just to call it and name it, which I'm trying to do here today. I'm just trying to explain to you that these vouchers are wealthy subsidies for folks that are pushed by some of the wealthiest people on the planet. And you just have to call it and name it and go out and meet it and debate it and discuss it. But you got to meet it with something else. So meet it with what? To me, those answers have to begin with what works. The biography that was kindly read to me was full. I mean, that's a lot of academic words for saying I spent a lot of time before I started doing what I'm doing now, partnering with state agencies, school districts, other community organizations, just literally trying to ask what does the research show helps improve education. Not accept the status quo, but what helps us move forward. Because we know vouchers don't, but what helps us move forward? So what works? And then also, increasingly, what's the right thing to do? I'm not going to shy away from that piece of the conversation. And we may have differences of opinion about what that is, but I think it's okay, especially since the other side of this question that I'm talking about has their own version of right and wrong. They think it's right to turn down LGBTQ kiddos from a classroom, or kids from a single mom family or divorced family from a classroom. They say it's the school's right to do it. I decline to accept that, at least when we're talking about public dollars, but I do recognize the responsibility to go out and say what I think is the right thing to do instead. So the first thing is just simply, you gotta fund public schools. As it turns out, while we've accumulated all this data and evidence against vouchers, we've accumulated a lot of data and evidence that show that simply directly investing in public schools actually improves them. I'm a Christian man. The biblical version of that statement comes from the Gospel of Matthew: where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. My own book says fund public schools. It really is that simple. Sometimes I go to audiences and they expect a very complicated, fancy pedagogical comment when I say let's do what works, but you got to start with you get what you pay for. So what else? Here are some of the things that research tells us works, and I also think are positive, forward-looking investments that are the right thing to do. So more investments in the teacher pipeline, including grow your own programs, pre-service and in-service training, supports like high-dose tutoring, literacy and STEM improvements, and I don't shy away from workforce language, by the way. I know I got a bunch of philosophers in the room. I think there's some good philosophical reasons for education, but I don't shy away from workforce language either. Give me a bill that builds jobs over an agenda that takes jobs away. Universal preschool and early education programs. Universal school meals. Investments in upgrades in HVAC systems. you don't have to be, I teach a lot of future educators when I am in the classroom, which isn't very often right now, but I always miss it. You don't have to be a teacher or an education major to know or to guess. It turns out that hungry kids can't learn as well. It turns out that kids who are cold in the winter or hot in the summer, or struggling to breathe in the classroom because they don't have the proper ventilation systems, because there's still some potential asbestos still in the building, or because we just got out of a pandemic or we're in a new one, or kids who, like in the city of Flint, not too far from my community, had to drink water for years and years and years that was tainted with lead. It turns out they can't learn as well. And there's a lot more. So that's my list. It's not comprehensive, but it's a start. The key is to do something. So here's my summary, you guys. All of this stuff about like funding wealthier families in these private schools, in my view, is nothing less than a policy coup. I say that in the book. And it needs to be met head on, and as part of everything else that's going on, these rollbacks to long-term investments in healthcare for people, in retirement security, in thousands and thousands of jobs. I don't care what side of the political aisle you're on. I would argue that it's not a good thing to celebrate it when people get laid off, whether it's from a factory, a small business, or a government job. Numbers to these people, abstract political theories, maybe, but also people's livelihoods. So I'm going to close by just sort of giving you one summary point here, because I get this question a lot from legislators in particular. And I know y'all aren't casting any legislative votes today, and that's okay. But I think the answer still applies. When I get asked to summarize this stuff, what is the case that I make for them to leave? Often you're in an office and you're just explaining what this stuff does, and they say, okay, what do you want me to take when I go out and think about this? And I just say this, listen, no matter where you are on the side of what's going on right now in this country, this political moment is going to pass. And what's going to be remembered, whether you're representing a district in a legislature, whether you're running a school district, whether you're a community organizer or activist or stakeholder group, whether you're just a parent, or whether, perhaps most of all, you are a student coming from some of these districts trying to make your way in this very uncertain world, this political moment will pass. Things have a way of changing, and what's going to be remembered will be what we do for our districts, what we do for our communities, what we do for our states, and God help us, what we do for our country. So that's what I have to say to you today. If you want to read more, you can. There's a little bit of a discount code, but you get pennies for these things when you publish academic work, so I promise I'm not sending you a sales pitch here. But I got 562 footnotes. If you're a footnote kind of person, you want to read more about what I had to say here today. They're in that book too. I appreciate you listening to me. I think we do have some time for some questions, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. So thank you.